Want to give a shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. All right, so quarter 2 of the year is wrapping up now. And every quarter this year, I'm going to give you an update on what my top 10 favorite books from this year are. As I go through this top 10 list, I'm going to note any books that were the same, that were on this list in the first quarter and where they've fallen on this list, or whether they're staying the same or possibly risen. Maybe I've looked at it and revised it. So let's go down this list, starting with number 10, and that is Empire of Silence. This is book number 1 in the Sun Eater series by 𝐒𝐨𝐳𝐬𝐿, and this was number 2 on my list in the first quarter, and it's dropped down to number 10. And the reason it's dropped down to number 10 is my reading experience in the second quarter of this year has been way better than the first quarter. I just keep getting 5-star after 5-star. And it keeps knocking stuff down, even though this was a 5-star read for me. It's just moved down the list. I loved it. I am an enormous fan now of 𝐒𝐨𝐳𝐬𝐿, and he's on that instant auto-buy author list for me. I just can't get enough of his writing style. This is a sci fantasy book that I think would appeal to any fantasy fan or any sci-fi fan that likes a more serious book. It's not grimdark, but it is a much more serious tone. The writing quality in terms of prose is kind of second to none. It's incredible. I find the story is takes a while to get to the meat of it, but that's good for a longer series because you get to get that progression into it and that foundation that they're going to take the rest of the series on. But yeah, just an incredible read and one of the more underrated fantasy books and sci-fi books maybe of all time. This needs more people getting into it. Number 9 is Dungeon Crawler Carl. This is book number 1 in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series by Matt Dinniman. This is a lit RPG in the sense that it's kind of got a ton of video game elements. It involves this character Carl who finds himself stuck inside of this futuristic kind of game show where everybody on Earth, or a lot of people on Earth, are forced to travel down these dungeons in Earth to try to fight to become the last one standing, if one even becomes left standing, to not die. And it's super fun. These characters have classes, they're leveling up. It's hysterical, but in a dark way. Horrible things are happening. Carl has to do horrific things, but it's got this lighthearted nature to it at the same time, which is a great, balance off each other because it just leaves you constantly hungry for more and never getting too lighthearted or too serious. And just that fun balance is a really cool thing that I don't get too many times in fantasy books. And incredible on audiobook, in the highest of the highest class for audiobooks. Number 8 is a reread that I did, and this is The Blade Itself. This is book number 1 in the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie. I read this book initially about 2 or 3 years ago, and I loved it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 the first time, and I couldn't think about it higher. This is like the top of the top for 5 out of 5s for me. Just like Dungeon Crawler Carl, this audiobook is immaculate. I still think that the audiobook narrator here, Stephen Pacey, it's the greatest performance for a fantasy audiobook that I've ever listened to. And it's the best way to, suck in this content. This is a epic fantasy grim dark tale, and this book is rather slow in a good way. Again, this is a trilogy. You have a lot more books. You have more content to go. And it's just laying that foundation out and laying out these amazing characters. And it just sucked me right in, especially on a reread because I already knew these characters and I just couldn't wait to get back. Number 7 is The Captain. This is book number 1 in the Last Horizon series by Will White. Will White just finished up his series Cradle, which is an all-time favorite of mine, even though that I did not like the last book in the series, which is very frustrating. But nonetheless, he started this new series, which is a science fiction story, and it is action-packed. It's so much fun. I had a smile on my face from basically the first page until the last page. It's funny. It's got this lightheartedness to it. It's so much jam-packed action. In Cradle, you had this series where the characters it's a progression fantasy where the characters get stronger and stronger as the series goes along. Starting off in chapter 1, you find out that this main character is OP, overpowered, and the other characters he gets along with him are overpowered, and they go fight bosses that are overpowered. It's fun as heck. Number 6 is The Justice of Kings. This is book number 1 in the Empire of the Wolf series by Richard Swan. I believe this book came out last year, maybe 2 years ago, and I was late to the game because I have heard a lot of mixed things about this book, but it is just fantastic. It is this cool blend of fantasy. It's got some horror elements to it, which I normally don't like, but I really liked it here. It's a detective story, and I don't normally like detective stories, but it just worked oh so well. But you've got this this traveling kind of like judge, and he goes around and, you know, the judge circuit, kind of like it was in early American history, maybe other countries too. I'm not from there. I'm not as familiar, but certainly that was the way it was in America. And they would just go around and figure out what cases were left pending, and he would go hear them. But he's got some magical elements that can let him deduce the truth of cases, and it is just a lot of fun. It's not short stories. It feels that way, but then as soon as the book kind of hits its, it hits the meat of it, like in the 10-15% of the mark, kind of sticks with that story the whole way, and you really just get sucked in trying to figure out what's going to happen and who done it. Number 5 is The Last Light. This is book number 5 in The Wandering Inn by 𝗏𝗏, which is quickly turning into one of my favorite series of all time. This is another lit RPG. You'll find a common element here, and it's progression fantasy. I love these two things. I've come over the last year just to fall in love with them. I love video games, and to have two of my favorite things, reading fantasy books and playing video games, kind of mixed into one. It's just such a great concoction that just works perfectly for me. It's about this character who gets instantly teleported into a fantasy world, kind of like Dungeons & Dragons, where there's classes and leveling up, and they're just trying to figure out how to make sense of this. This is the best book out of the 5. This series is coming out on ebooks and audiobooks, but you can read it for free on thewanderinginns.com, and there's like 40 plus book content worth. It's the longest fantasy series of all time, and I can absolutely say with the most truth that I've ever said, in that I have never found somebody that read this book or this series based on me telling them that ended up not liking it. It's got 100% hit rate. Every single person says, I slept on this for too long, and what have I done with my life? All I want to do is read all of these Wandering Inn books. Check it out. It's incredible. Number 4 is The Howling Dark. This is book number 2 in the Sun Eater series by 𝗏𝗏, an improvement on Empire of Silence in basically every single way. No longer do you need that slow build-up that was needed in that first book to establish these characters. We're in it. The action is packed. It is so imaginative with these different planets that they get to go to, and the quote-unquote baddies that are here are just so well realized. The emotional depth that you go through. I mean, I am not an emotional reader, but I very openly cried in a portion of this book, and for a reason that I've never really cried in a book before. And I don't want to say more than that, but it's a unique thing that happened. And it will always have a magical place in my heart, not just because of that emotion that it evoked, but the whole story that was in it. I just can't wait to get to book number 3. Number 3 on this list is The Wolf. This is book number 1 in Under the Northern Sky by Leo Carew. This was a Patreon pick, so every month on my Patreon channel, I spin a wheel to figure out which recommended book that I'm going to read and review. I'd never heard of this one before. It is criminally underrated. It is so fantastic. This has been said a million times by not just me, but others. But this is another book that feels like it has a lot of influences from A Song of Ice and Fire, but it is definitely very different. But it's just really, really ingeniously fun and serious. I mean, I love the characters here. The plot is just incredible. It involves this boy who finds himself in charge of running a kingdom that he does not necessarily want to be doing, but he must do it anyways. And he's got enemies within and without, and he's got to figure out how to stay in charge and lead his country out of civil, not embroiled in civil war, and also fighting these enemies. You get perspectives from the enemy side and the main side. It's brilliant. Number 2 is The Wall of Storms. This is book number 2 in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. But this number 2 book is almost as good as the first one. But the first one is what I've said is my second favorite book of all time, just behind the final book in Malazan, Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. This is a historical retelling of the Han Dynasty's foundation in ancient China. And but with a lot of fantasy elements and new characters, it takes away that rapid pace in the first one and tells a more cohesive narrative that slows things down a little bit. But it's really about this empire that it has these foreign kind of like, alien, not aliens, but different people that they never knew existed that are coming to invade and how they're going to deal with that. It's just the writing is incredible. The plot's incredible. Everything about this book is incredible, and I can't wait to read it again someday. And number 1 was the number 1 book from the first quarter, and it's the only other book besides Empire of Silence that has stayed on this list, and it is The Grace of Kings. This is book number 1 in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. This book is just written for me, I feel like. You ever read a book like that where it's like tailor-made just for you? Well, that's what this one was. It's got everything that I would ever want. It reads kind of like a fast-paced history book. I love history books. With these fantasy elements, with an amazing plot, crazy action that it feels like it's got the plot, complexity of something like A Song of Ice and Fire, all 5 books, wrapped up into one book. It's just action sequence after action sequence. You don't get a chance to really breathe, and I would hate it. Every book that I read was like that, but to get such a breath of fresh air in this one was just a magical experience, and I cannot say more positive things about this series. So that's it for me. Join me in 3 months where I update this list again, or you don't have to wait 3 months, and you can learn about these books as I'm reading them because I review every book that I read. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, Brian, CJ, Darren, Jonathan, My Book is Lit, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Anna, Andra, Angelo, Ben, Blair, Brock, Evan, Jen B, Harry B, Jamie, Jeff Pixler, Maria, Michael Sugarman, Sky, TW57, Wacky, and Zion.